one considers the issue of empowerment, I think the first thing to bear in mind is that there's an inverse relationship between the issue of empowerment and the issue of control. Because when people are empowered, they're empowered to the degree to which they have the autonomy and the authority to decide what they're going to do. And also, for me, there's a relationship between the authority that somebody is entrusted with to act autonomously and their own maturity. I mean, you don't entrust the keys to the gun safe, for instance, to a 3-year-old, because the child neither has the knowledge nor the moral maturity to act responsibly. And it also suggests, therefore, that because growth is an incremental process, it suggests that empowerment has to do with an incremental suspension of control in order to empower the subordinate. Now, if you bear all of this in mind and you consider each increment of the growth of the person, each increment of empowerment, and you were to consider, well, how does one do that? Then we have a rule of thumb that is sort of supported by this folk wisdom that says, don't give a man a fish, empower him to fish. So if you wanted to empower somebody to fish, the first thing you'd do is you'd give them all sorts of things to be able to fish. You would give them a hook, a line, a sinker, some bait, a boat, maybe some beer, depending on where they came from. You would, however, also have to teach them how to use that stuff. You need to teach them, how to bait a hook, where they should cast, maybe the feeding habits of different kinds of fish, all sorts of things. Now, the difference between these two categories is a little bit like a software and a hardware distinction. If you look at the first issue, the hook, the line, and the sinker and all of that, this, in a sense, refers to stuff that sits outside of the person. So we refer to that stuff as means. The second category, how to bait a hook, etc., and this really refers to competency and skills that sit inside the person. We can call that ability. So what we're suggesting is that if you're empowering somebody to fish, you give them two things. You give them the means, what's required of them, and you make them able to do what's required of them. However, those two things aren't adequate. I mean, let's say, for instance, you were dealing with me and you wanted to empower me to fish. You give me all the means I could require to fish. You give me all the ability I could require to fish. But I'm a particularly lazy person and you're a particularly nice person who also has a freezer of fish at home. And after going through this whole process, you say to me, don't worry, if you don't catch a fish, I'll give you one from my freezer. I mean, how willingly will I fish? And probably not very willingly at all. So, the last thing you've got to bring to the party that actually engages my will is like a bloody mindedness, is to say something to me like, if you don't catch a fish after this, starve. We call that accountability. In other words, empowering somebody means three things and not just two. It means to give them the means to do what's required of them, to make them able to do what's required of them, and to hold them accountable. Now, what those three things mean in an organizational context, if you consider the issue of means, for example, means in an organizational context would be to give people the tools to do what's required of them, the authority to do what's required of them, a clear standard, the boss's time, the information that they may need, etc. If you consider the issue of ability, there's really two themes here. It's to teach the person how they should do what's required of them and why they should do it. And of those two themes, the why is actually far more important than the how if you're trying to empower somebody. Because, if I know how to do something, but I don't know why, I'm not going to feel a sense of ownership about doing this. I won't personally feel accountable. Whereas if you teach me why I should do the thing, I know why, then I'll work out how to do it. So the why is infinitely more important than the how. Finally, if you look at the issue of accountability, then it's clear that running through the middle of the issue of accountability is the problem with standards, because you can't hold somebody accountable for anything if there isn't a clear standard for them, for what's required of them. Which suggests that, in a sense, somebody's performances can either be above standard or below standard. Now, somebody's performance can be above standard in one of two ways. They can either be going the extra mile, or they can be careful to meet the standard that you specified. So you've asked the person to do X, and they do the X that you asked them to do. Somebody's performance can be below standard for one of two reasons. They can either be deliberately malevolent, in other words, they deliberately do what is unacceptable, or they are just careless, they don't give a damn. Now, if you consider, how an empowering leader would deal with this range of possibilities from an accountability point of view, then clearly when somebody has gone the extra mile, it would be appropriate to reward that person. Whereas if somebody is careful to do what's required of them, it would be appropriate to recognize that person. On the other hand, if somebody is deliberately malevolent, if somebody is deliberately doing what is unacceptable, then the appropriate thing to do with that person would be to punish them. And what I mean by this is to dismiss them. Whereas if they are just careless, they don't give a damn, then the appropriate thing to do would be to censure them. And what I mean by this is to warn them. In other words, if you carry on like this, then I will dismiss you anyhow. Now, when one looks at this instrument from this point of view, if we're saying that empowering somebody, in any increment that you empower the person, you've got to give them the means to do what's required of them, make them able to do what's required of them, and hold them accountable. It suggests that there's a logical flow here, which kind of has a dividing line. I mean, so what I'm suggesting is that the means and the ability, if you like, are a precondition for accountability. And that suggests that, in a sense, in this process of empowerment, you can kind of get this wrong in two ways. And we call the difference in which one can get this wrong as the difference between the hard mistake and the soft mistake. The hard mistake is to treat means and ability issues as if they are accountability issues. So we assume that the person does not have the means to do what's required of them. They don't have the ability to do what's required of them. So no surprise, their performance is below standard, and you as the boss, you either censure the person, you give them a written warning, or you dismiss them. I mean, that's really not acceptable. That's too harsh. But then there's another mistake we make in enterprises, and this actually happens very frequently, and we call it the soft mistake. And the soft mistake is the exact inverse of the hard mistake. It's to treat accountability issues as if they are means and ability issues. So the person has all the means to do what's required of them. They're perfectly able to do what's required of them. Their performance is below standard, and you send the person on a course, or you give them some coaching, or I've actually seen people even change the standard of what's required of the person. Now, of these two mistakes, the hard mistake and the soft mistake, the soft mistake is infinitely worse. In the first instance, because the soft mistake is consistent with keeping the rotten apple in the barrel. I mean, if you don't remove the rotten apple from the barrel, I mean, clearly all the apples go rotten. And this is the same thing with people. If you aren't holding somebody in a group accountable who's not actually pulling their weight, then over a period of time, people incrementally just start becoming equal to the lowest common denominator. The second and more pernicious effect of the soft mistake is that it actually creates the opposite of an empowering kind of environment, because we suggest that empowering people requires an incremental suspension of control. Whereas what happens with a soft mistake is an incremental growth of control because of a phenomenon which I like to refer to as the let's not witch hunt syndrome. Now, what the let's not witch hunt syndrome says is that when something goes wrong, don't have a witch hunt, just make sure it never happens again. So, say for instance, I work for an organization where I'm entrusted with a credit card to use on company business, and I've been given all the means and the ability to use this credit card responsibly, and I use the credit card to buy a holiday for myself and my entire extended family to the Maldives. Now, how I've seen people react, or leaders react in corporates when there's phenomena like this, is they get horrified. Say, my God, he abused the credit card. So, we'll send him on a corporate governance course and quickly take the credit cards away from everybody else. So this is the effect of the soft mistake. You see, because you aren't holding somebody accountable, the only effect that the only sort of other recourse you have is to impose a control. And the imposition of that control means that everybody else then gets punished for the sins of the one. Which basically suggests that over a period of time, when people aren't being held accountable, there'll be a growth of control in the organization. Now, the last thing I'd like to kind of consider is that what the essence of the issue of empowerment is. And for me, if we say that empowerment is about making people powerful, then let's understand what that means. Here we have a person, and she clearly, there's, in any situation, she can differentiate between herself and the rest of the world, that which surrounds her. And if you consider her intent, in any situation, she can either construct her intent on what she's getting, or she can construct her intent on what she's giving. Now, when she constructs her intent on what she's getting, there are implications to this. If she wants something from somebody else, the other person's ability to withhold what she wants basically gives the other person power over her. In other words, she becomes weak. When you construct your intent on what you want to get, you become weak. On the other hand, when she shifts her intent from what she's trying to get to what she can give, she now is giving attention to and constructing her intent on what she has power over, what leaves her own hands, what she's giving, and therefore she becomes powerful. So if we want to empower her, we want to make her powerful, which means we want to shift her intent from what she's getting to what she's giving. Now, that process of constantly shifting people's intent from what they're getting to what they're giving really is the process of the maturation of people. So, if you consider maturation from the point of view of the move from kind of a generally immature state to a generally mature state, but you thought of it as almost an incremental journey, then on the left-hand side, or this whole issue of immaturity starts at birth. I mean, the most immature time that you have is at birth. And from an intent point of view, this is very significant, because at birth you've had nothing yet. Whatever you're going to get, you will still get. In other words, at birth, the infant is here to get in the most unconditional sense of the word. Now, on the other hand, if we look at the right-hand side of the continuum going towards death, when you die, you don't get anything. You give everything unconditionally. Now, the first thing to bear in mind about this process is that it is an incremental process, and you can use a metaphor of shade to understand that. In other words, going from dark to lighter, 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 lighter. And if you think of it as shade, you can separate it, as we've done here, into two kind of discrete categories. And that suggests that as you mature, there's a change in the proportion of the mix of your intent. So if you left of the middle line, then more frequently than not, you will give attention and construct your intent on what you're getting. And you're right of the middle line, then more frequently than not, you construct your intent on what you're giving. Now, how this process is enabled by the issue of accountability becomes apparent when if you kind of zoom into the process a little bit and looked at this move as of incremental changes, almost like going up steps on a staircase. So let's say, for instance, here this person is in a situation, and this person is trying to get, so let's assume this is me. I'm in a situation, I'm dealing with a situation on the basis of what I want to get. Now, what we already understand is that if you construct your intent on what you're getting, you construct your intent on what others have power over and what you don't have power. In other words, you become weak. Which means to say, when you deal with the situation that's in front of you on the basis of what you're trying to get, the situation has power over you. You get stuck. You stagnate. When you shift your intent from what you're getting to what you should be giving, you're now acting for something which is bigger than your self-interest. And acting for something which is bigger than your self-interest allows you to rise out of yourself, which enables you to take the next step forward in your growth. And this is true in every increment. As our intent matures, because we suffer consequences for our action. So by constantly kind of having our accountability cultivated, that enables an incremental move, if you like, up this continuum of maturation. Which means to say the final product of the process of empowerment isn't just that people become more capable and more competent over a period of time, but actually become increasingly mature. They become increasingly able to give. They increasingly construct their intent on what they can give. Because finally, maturity has to mean being here to give unconditionally.